joining us from ApplicantLab. And Maria has a ton of admissions experience. So she went to Harvard Business School, graduated in 2005. While she was there, she volunteered in the admissions with the admissions group, doing outreach to underrepresented groups. After that, she informally helped many sort of friends, colleagues, relatives with MBA admissions. And then in 2010, decided to start a company. The company's ApplicantLab. And it basically is disrupting admissions consulting. Admissions consultants cost thousands of dollars, but Maria has a very affordable offering, a fraction of that price for a large number of MBA programs, and has helped thousands of students to date. So welcome, Maria.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so we wanted to get you on because so much is happening in the world, and I hope you and your family are sort of staying safe with the COVID-19 outbreak. And that has completely disrupted at least students' perceptions of MBA admissions, and there's lots of questions. So I wanted to lean on your expertise. But before we even get into that, I'd love for those who are less familiar, just thinking about applying to business school, for you to just do an outline of, what are the different rounds of applications? How does all of that work? If you could do an overview for someone who might be less familiar.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So normally the way how MBA admissions works, at least, and here when I'm talking about the schools, I'm mostly talking about the top US programs, right? There are some European programs that have slightly different start dates, et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, when we talk about the US programs, there are three main sort of deadline, almost like buckets of deadlines in which you can apply. Round one, round two, and round three. So normally round one deadlines are in the sort of September, October timeframe. Round two is more in the early January timeframe. And then round three tends to be in the March and April timeframe. Now, normally, those of us in admissions land, we normally tell people, if you're thinking about applying in round three, which is around this time of year, right, March, April, don't really bother, right? Just sort of wait a few more months until that September, October timeframe, and just wait until then, because what happens is that the schools start before each round one, they start with a blank slate of, they've got X number of spots in the class, and they say, okay, we need to fill 400 spots, 800 spots, whatever it is. And so now let's go through these different applications and pick the people that we're gonna put, as students in those spots. So by the time you get to round three, most business schools are pretty much, most of the seats are spoken for. This year, though, with all of the craziness around COVID-19, it is a completely different situation. And so, sort of as a spoiler alert about what we're going to talk about today, I am encouraging people to consider applying this round three, even though normally it's kind of a suicide mission.
Wow. So yeah, let's get into that. Why is this year different? Why should students consider applying round three?
Well, because of all of the uncertainty around COVID-19 and coronavirus, there are so many different things that are up in the air. Number one, on a sort of a policy, national policy level, it's unclear if international students or students who do not have visas to reside in the United States, if they will even be able to come to campus, right? There is a potential, situation or scenario where the international students may not even be allowed into the country if we're still on a total travel lockdown at that point. So at that point, the schools may say, okay, for example, Harvard Business School has said, look, if that happens to you, if we've already accepted you, and you cannot physically make it to campus, we will defer your candidacy for a year. And what that means is that technically, you should have been starting this September, but we're going to let you wait a year and start next September, at which point, hopefully, this will all be behind us, at least predominantly behind us. So can international students make it to campus? Number two, our class is going to be predominantly online, or will people still be able to meet in person? Because as you know, having attended a top MBA program yourself, one of the biggest benefits of the MBA is the network, right? The relationships that you build, the friendships that you build, the professional networking that you build. And so a big reason why MBA programs charge as much as they do is because people put so much value on the potential to build that network. So there's a lot of confusion right now and a lot of fear where people who have already been accepted, who 3 months ago were delighted at the thought of attending a program, are now saying, well, hold on, if it's going to be online in the fall, am I going to get to actually make those friendships? So should I maybe wait a year? Should I hold off on doing it? And so what's happening right now with the admissions officers, from their perspective, they're seeing as you can imagine, admissions officers run a million statistics and analytics, and they try to, come up with probabilities that if we offer this student a seat, are they going to take it? And so right now they're seeing people who would have in any other year been a guaranteed enrollment now reaching out to them and saying, like, I'm not sure that I'm going to come. And so now the admissions officers may find themselves in a month or two scrambling to fill that class, which is why we're seeing a bunch of schools now saying, you know what? Our deadline used to be April 9th. Now it's going to be July 9th. Now it's going to be June 15th. So they're intentionally expanding that round 3 so that more people can apply in case they find themselves having to fill a little bit or a huge amount of the class.
And that's a fascinating analysis. They're recognizing that, okay, students, yes, I valued my in-person experience. And I know many business schools are online, and I know that there's a lot of value in that. But if someone wanted an in-person experience and now is getting an online experience, that might not be what they wanted. And so it sounds like from what you're saying, those students might defer a year or want to come in the following year in fall 2021 when campuses, hopefully, I will say, will be open. But that does open up an opportunity, it sounds like, for folks to apply in round 3. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. What I'm telling people is, like, look, if everything goes back to normal, let's say there's some sort of miracle solution overnight, and we end up in August, September with business as usual. That is, all of the international students are in fact able to come to the campus, and all of these classes start up again. There's really no downside, right? The worst thing that could happen if you apply right now during the extended round 3 is that the schools will say no. But that's the worst thing they would have said anyway. So there's very little downside in case everything, gets cured. But in case there isn't, I think there's a tremendous upside. And for me, that potential upside, throwing your hat in the ring and taking that chance, I think is absolutely worth it.
Yeah. And I guess a related question is, so with the COVID-19 outbreak and the associated layoffs, many companies have had layoffs. Do you think programs next year for the fall 2021 will be more competitive? And is that another reason to apply in round 3 this year?
Absolutely. So right now, some of these layoffs have definitely already started hitting the hospitality industry, the travel industry, right? Those early canary in the coal mine portions of the economy where people staying home immediately means zero revenue. But I do think that if the economy continues to suffer, those effects are going to ripple throughout the broader economy. So if things should continue the way they are, I do think we're going to see a lot more layoffs. And when people get laid off, they immediately think, what better thing to do with my time than to ride out the upcoming recession in business school, right? If I time this right, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to go to school while everyone else is suffering and while everyone else is losing their jobs and while everything is falling apart. But then if it's a 2-year program, when I graduate, hopefully things will be back on the up and up. And so if I can time it right, it'll all work out for me. And so we saw this in 2008. This also happened in 2001. In previous recessions, people tend to look to graduate school to ride things out. And I think another thing that makes this a little bit different from previous recessions is that with a previous recession, let's say 2008 with the mortgage crisis, nobody really knew what it was going to take to turn things around, right? There was a big sense of limbo. But with COVID-19, fingers crossed, if what the scientists are telling us is right, we will hopefully have some sort of a vaccine within the next 12, 14, 18 months. And so that way, if you apply in the upcoming round 1, by which I mean the autumn of 2020, and that means you're going to start school in the autumn of 2021, that's about a year and a half from now. So the hope is that by then there will be some sort of a scientifically driven resolution to the situation. So I think people are going to look at that probability and say, well, I don't want to go right now because it's all going to be online, but I definitely want to go when I'm able to attend campus events in person, and also when hopefully the economy will start turning around. So I think this upcoming round 1 and round 2 are going to be exceptionally competitive.
Okay. And just going back to the autumn 2020 or the fall 2020 class, have you heard schools talk about going entirely online? I know that no decisions have been made yet. It is a risk. Have you heard anything?
So there's, no school yet has officially announced one thing or the other, right? Again, I think there's this hope that maybe something will emerge like from the heavens and we can all get back to normal. And that way the student visas can start getting processed and the loan applications can start getting processed and everything will be back to normal. But I do think that a lot of schools are saying, look, there is a very good chance that we will be online only, if not for the entire first semester, at least for a couple of months during that first semester, while hopefully we come up with serum antibody tests or whatever it is that they're talking about to make sure that people will be safe. So I if I had to bet, I'd say that there's definitely, I think, a chance that the first semester coming up this fall will be virtual. And in fact, for example, Duke, the Fuqua Business School, has in fact extended their start date. They've pushed it by a month in the hopes that that month will buy them time. So if they would normally have started on, say, August 15th, now they're starting on September 15th to hopefully give more of an opportunity for things to resolve.
Yeah, I'm sure the business schools are scrambling and planning, and it's a challenging time for everyone. But it is helpful for students to have this perspective of, okay, round 3 this year, it's worth applying. If you're thinking about going to business school, you might have some in-person experience potentially the following year, maybe spring semester of the first year. It's still a great time. And next year will be really competitive. Doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. You should apply, but next year will likely be very competitive. So moving on to another favorite topic of ours at Magoosh, we are a test prep company. So let's talk about the GMAT and the GRE. What have you seen in terms of round 3 admissions, or schools rather, waiving the GMAT requirement? Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because with the test centers closed, right, up until now, technically, you can only take the GMAT at a sanctioned test center with, the proctors and all of the security measures in place. And so a lot of schools realize that, applicants are human. And so if the deadline is, say, April 10th, a lot of people sign up to take the GMAT on April 9th at the last minute, and they sort of push it off. And so now they're realizing, well, wait, now they physically are incapable. It's not possible for them to take the GMAT. So what schools are doing, for the most part, is they're saying, look, you can apply without the GMAT, and then if we let you in, it will be conditional upon you reaching a certain score threshold in the future. Some schools like Darden at UVA are actually saying, look, if you took the SATs or the ACTs in high school, you can use those scores, because at least that gives us some sort of a proxy baseline for how you do on standardized tests in general. Now, it is true that the GRE is now available to take online, and the GMAT has said that they are going to be available online soon. So I think, though, given all of how much disruption there's been, I like to think that if a school has said, look, we're okay with you applying without a GMAT, I like to think that they will honor that and not go back on it and then say, well, hold up. Now that the GMAT's available for you to take in your living room, now we actually want it, right? So I do think that that the schools will be more lenient and understanding on that front.
Yes, and so that makes sense. The school's made a commitment saying you could either take the test later or we'll look at other test scores, so you don't necessarily need to take the GMAT. And you're right, the GMAT has announced that any day now they'll have an at-home offering. So for those who don't know, if you haven't yet applied and you're applying to a school that requires the GMAT, you will be able to take it at home. They'll have some proctoring in place. The GRE is already allowing that. People have already taken it at home. They have a number of security and proctoring measures, and we'll link to some articles below the video that tell you a little bit more about that. But so one question here is, let's say a student takes the GMAT, doesn't score as well as they'd hoped, and they're applying to schools that don't technically require the GMAT. When should they submit or not submit their scores to increase their odds for admissions?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, and you're obviously you guys are the GMAT kings and queens over there. But I think if someone takes the test and does not do what they were hoping to do, I think I would advise them to cancel that score, right? So that way the score would not appear on their official test. I do think that some schools try to get around that by asking the students to upload their unofficial report, which may show the canceled, the fact that a test was taken and that it was canceled. So I think right off the bat, if someone takes a test and for whatever reason it doesn't go well, I would just cancel it. I wouldn't take that risk. I think if somebody already took a test a long time ago and has an official score, I do think they have to disclose it to the school, even if they did really poorly and they've been studying super hard, they've been taking the Magoosh classes, they've been, really seeing that score increase, and they think they're going to do a lot better. I think what I would advise them is you can't lie, right? You can't see that. At some point, they're going to see that official score report. They're going to see that you took the test a year ago and got a 520 or whatever. So I think you have to disclose it. But then what I think I would advise people is that most schools, pretty much every school, has something called an optional essay in the application where you can explain any extenuating circumstances. So what I'm telling people to do is say, look, my GMAT score I took it a year ago does not reflect my actual potential. I'm taking Magoosh. I'm preparing as much as I can. And in my practice test recently, I have been scoring a 730. So my hope is that I will at least get to some sort of a level like that. So at least that way you're signaling to the school that you're not happy with your 520 or whatever, that you're not hey, the rules don't apply to me. I'm just going to submit this loosey-goosey score, but that you're actually cognizant of the fact that it is a low score and that you're letting them know I am taking steps to do better. And here's where I am with that process.
Okay. That's some good tactical advice. And it actually leads me to another question, which is, let's say you're applying to a school that doesn't require the GMAT and you haven't yet taken it. But it is round 3, which you're saying there's a reason to apply this year. Would you say it's okay to just apply without the GMAT and you still have a decent chance as long as sort of the rest of your application is solid? Or would you recommend at least trying to take the GMAT and potentially canceling the score?
Yeah, I think what I would do is I would focus right now on getting that application in. So working on those essays, getting those strong recommendations, tidying up the resume, right? Anyone who's familiar with ApplicantLab will immediately know that the resume you used for your last job search is not the same resume you should use for your MBA application. So putting all of that work into the application materials, I think right now is a great use of time, because if the schools say look, we're going to make a decision right now. It's going to be a conditional decision, conditional upon you getting a certain GMAT score. That does buy you some time, I think. So ideally, you would be doing both. You would be preparing and doing your application at the same time. But if you have limited time, I would say get the application in as soon as you can, and then immediately shift towards GMAT prep or GRE prep, and then sort of hope that maybe it'll take them a few weeks to first read your file, then another week or two to reach out to you, and then they'll say you've got 3 weeks now to take it. So maybe you'll be able to expand that time frame out so that you will then get that extra bit of study time that you would not have otherwise had in a normal round 3. The other thing I would advise people to do is, if they haven't yet taken either one of the standardized tests, maybe take a practice test or two. Take a GRE practice test and a GMAT practice test and ask yourself which one of these tests resonates. Where do I think I'm doing better? And then sign up to take that test, because I do find that some people do really well on the GMAT, but some people are more comfortable with the GRE. And so now's a great chance for you to experiment with the 2 different tests and see which one you should pursue.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. In that, even outside of sort of what's going on with COVID-19, we do get questions from students around, should I take the GRE or the GMAT? And the advice you share is similar to the advice we share. One question I wanted to ask you from the admissions side specifically is, the GMAT is the traditional business school exam. The GRE has been accepted more recently at many business schools. Have you seen any downside, even if you do well on the GRE, to submitting a GRE score with your application? Do you have a sense of how the admissions committees look at the GRE versus the GMAT?
I think that it is identical. I do think that, first of all, one of the reasons, so there are sort of 2 main reasons that the schools care about the test scores. One is, can this person do the work, right? No one wins in a situation where an applicant is accepted to a program where they are going to flounder, right? Where the pace of the work, the rigor of the work is too much for them and they're struggling and they're miserable. Nobody wins. And that's the school loses, the student loses, everyone loses. So at a very base level, the reason schools even ask for standardized tests to begin with is to get a baseline sense of, can this person handle the work here? And then at another level, the test scores do add an element of prestige factor to the school. So especially the GMAT score, since the schools are cognizant of their average GMAT scores for things like the US News and World Report rankings, that's the other thing that they look for. So the good news is that since so much of the business school ecosystem is focused on the GMAT, when the rankings come out, people tend to focus on okay, what's the average GMAT score at that school? People don't really ask themselves well, what's the average GRE score? So I have found in the past that admissions committees tend to be more lenient with GRE scores. So when people apply and for whatever reason, the GMAT is just not their thing, if they apply with a GRE score, I find that they tend to have more success. And I think I have this very unofficial theory as to why this is, but the business schools care more about the quant side than the verbal. Both sides are important. But if they had to choose to only see one result of one of the two sides of the test, they would want to see the quant result. And I think that the GRE quant section is a little bit easier. And I think also because so many people take the GRE, right? The GRE is the graduate school acceptance test, whether you're trying to get a degree in English literature or French Renaissance painting or architecture or whatever, you have to take the GRE. And so I think that since there is such a huge diversity in the backgrounds of people who take the GRE, I think scoring higher on a percentile basis on the quant is probably easier. I think the number of people who are taking the test who are not quant, are not naturally quanty, is probably much higher with the GRE versus the GMAT, which is a self-selecting group. These are business-focused people. So I think that someone could do identically well on the GMAT or the GRE, and I suspect that the percentile will be higher on the GRE. So I think that also benefits the more quant challenged person. But there's no downside to taking the GRE at all from an admissions perspective.
Oh, that's great to hear, and I know that's something that's on the mind of many students. And at least I heard a nugget in there that you shared that the U.S. News official rankings are based on the GMAT, which schools care about, so they are more willing to tolerate a lower, potentially lower GRE score. And I think that's an amazing insight and one that makes a lot of sense from all that I know about sort of admissions. And I will say at Magoosh, if you happen to sign up for one of our programs and you start with the GMAT and you realize like this isn't my thing and you want to switch to the GRE, you can reach out to us and we'll take care of that for you. So obviously letting our students know that.
That's great.
Yeah. So what? In terms of the best way to determine, all of the colleges have different policies around whether they're waiving a requirement or whether, like you said, Darden's accepting SAT and ACT scores potentially, or whether they're asking you to take it later, the GMAT later. What's the best way for students to get this information? Should they be calling and reaching out to the schools directly? Or is there another way for them to get this information? Because it is a complex sort of piece to navigate.
Yeah, I do think so. I think some folks out there are, and I'm going to do this too, are compiling like blog posts that are like a one-stop shop with all of the latest updates, and I'll get that over to you a little later. I would not necessarily call the school. I think the schools are being pretty open and pretty transparent on their websites about, okay, this is a crazy time for everyone, and here's what we're seeing, and here's what we're thinking, and we don't know what's going to happen, but just bear with us, and let's all work together to figure this out. So I would say, barring if you can't find information on sort of a blog post where it consolidates everything, I would just say go to the school's website. I wouldn't call them because they're so busy and stressed right now, and they're all working remotely too. So the last thing they need is to be inundated with phone calls when it's like, look, just go to our website. It's on the website, right? So that would be the number one source is always the school's website directly.
That's great. And then before we wrap up, I wanted to give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about ApplicantLab for anyone listening, about how you could potentially help, or your program could help with round 3 admissions or admissions in the competitive year for fall 2021.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So as you mentioned before, as people watching this video may be aware, there are people called admissions consultants, and I am one. And so what we do is we help people navigate all of the more qualitative elements of the application, right? How do you position yourself? What do you write in the essays? If the school asks that essay, what do I say? And so normally most other admissions consultants do this in terms of a one-on-one relationship, right? So with other admissions consultants, you would call them and talk on the phone for hours. What I've done instead is I have created an online platform called ApplicantLab.com, and it walks you through all of the same steps and all of the same advice that I would have walked you through in person, but I do it through a series of interactive exercises and videos. So that way, first of all, I charge dramatically less than other admissions consultants, right? Because they need to be compensated for that time, understandably. And so that's why a one school package at most admissions firms they started around $4,500 US and can quickly escalate up to $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 or more because they need to be compensated for that very high touch hand holding thing. But just like how Magoosh revolutionized the test prep industry, I'm trying to do the same thing with admissions. So Applicant Lab gives you all of the advice that you need that you would get normally from an admissions consultant. It's from me. I have over 15 years of experience. I'm a member of AGAC, which is the Elite Admissions Consultants Organization. So I am an expert, but it's available online. So it's a fraction of the price, and B, it's available anytime you want. Right? If you work with the traditional consultant, you would have to call them and say, okay, are you available at 2? No, that doesn't work for me. But with ApplicantLab, if you need to get on at 3 in the morning and watch a couple of videos on how to tackle the Stanford application, I've got you covered. So I break down information for all business. I provide information that is useful for all business school applications. And I really dive deep into the top sort of 20 to 30 schools, especially the ones with the tricky essays like Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, et cetera. And, people are, if you just Google ApplicantLab reviews, you're going to find a lot of my happy customers who get great results and who saved thousands and thousands of dollars along the way.
Well, that's awesome. And as you know, at Magoosh, we wanted to come in and provide an affordable option for tutors that, typically cost thousands of dollars. And so I love what you're doing with ApplicantLab, providing access to those who might not have otherwise been able to afford it. Thank you so much for taking the time today to share your knowledge about the admissions process. This year is so unique. The word that's thrown around is unprecedented, which is true. And so, it's fascinating to hear how, the punchlines here are, normally you don't apply in round 3, but you should this year because you don't know what's going to happen. Next year might be really competitive. Focus on your admissions, your essay, your resume, maybe even check out ApplicantLab to help you. And then you can think about your tests maybe shortly thereafter if you haven't already taken them. And hopefully folks found this helpful. And I want to thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me. This was great.